Thanks, Kevin. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Mike Maurice, and it's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere sober. Um, because of people like you in rooms like this, I haven't had a drink since September the 25th in 1983. And I always like to start to read something out of the big book. I like to read the forward part of the forward to the third edition. In spite of the great increase in size and span of this fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. And that's what my first sponsor taught me my job would be if I'm asked to lead an AA meeting. There we go. Sorry about that. Something blocking my screen. Had my first drink when I was about 10 years old. It was some stolen altar wine. And I don't know what that drink did for anybody else. But that drink for me was like taking an Alka-Seltzer and dropping it in a glass of hot water. It just exploded inside of me. And if you see things flashing, I talk with my hands as well. I'm mostly Italian, and I don't know how to do one without the other. So I don't know what that drink did for the other kids, but I couldn't wait to go back to the sacristy at Blessed Sacrament where I went to grade school. And it eventually the nuns locked the door and we just moved on to the next dare. Wasn't a big deal. You know, at 10 years old, you got to do what you got to do. I mean, I love what that drink did for me, and I couldn't wait to drink every time I got a chance to drink. That's what I tried to do. And my drinking progressed till, I was 16 years old. And, we would do things like play Hey Mister. I don't know if anybody knows what the game Hey Mister is, but that's when you're not old enough to drink. And you go down in my case, we go down Greenmount Avenue where there's a couple of bars, liquor stores, and you stand outside and you wait for a drunk to go in to get a bottle or something to drink. And you say, Hey, mister, how about getting us something to drink? And sometimes they would, sometimes they would rip you off, and it's just the chance we took. But I loved it. I love the effect produced by alcohol. Our big book talks about that. Makes me just a garden variety drunk. And, at 16 years old, I found it more interesting to drink than I did to go to school. And let me back up a little bit before that and just say, that I was raised by good parents, by good grandparents in a nice neighborhood in Waverly, in Baltimore City, by the old Memorial Stadium. I went to Catholic school, went to mass every Sunday with my parents and my grandparents. Had faith in some semblance of God, but still at that young age, I didn't believe all the stuff that they were teaching me. And in my opinion, they were cramming it down my throat. But one Sunday we walked up Old York Road to go to church. And there were guys flipping coins and drinking out of a brown paper bag in this laundromat. And that became much more attractive to me than going to mass and listening to Monsignor Wooden talk about his God. And I followed that. And I followed that kind of behavior. 16 years old, I quit school. My parents told me if I'm going to live in their house, I'm going to get a job. And I got a job with this roofing company. And there were some old guys at this roofing company that the first stop when they left the shop in the morning was this bar on 27th and Huntington. And some of us were getting egg sandwiches. They were getting a fifth of some kind of cheap liquor and 12 warm beers. We were putting a warehouse roof on up the street from Calvert Distillery, and the smell of that stunk. The smell of what these guys were drinking stunk, and the feeling of what I drank the night before, and I was dying. And these guys taught me how to get around that. Just take a drink, and I would take a sip of that cheap liquor, and most times I would throw it back up. Sometimes I would keep it down, but I mean that's these guys were teaching me how to drink or some semblance of that. I don't know, but anyway, somewhere between the age of 16 and 18 years old, my life had gotten so unmanageable and out of control that my parents had our house raided by the Baltimore City Narcotics Division because they could no longer stand to see my brother and I living in their home the way we were living. And what we were doing, basically, they both worked. They never drove. We never owned a car. They would get on the number 8 bus and go to work in downtown Baltimore, and my brother and I would rush back home instead of going to school, and it would just be, one big party 5 days a week. And they got sick of that. I guess they got sick of the neighbors complaining about it. And my brother, up until the time he took his own life because of his disease, rarely spoke to my parents because of that. And the other side of that coin, which I believe was my alcoholism, I could have cared less. I was shocked that they would do that, but it to me, it just didn't sink in. It had no long lasting effect. And I learned a long time ago in this program that from an old guy in Towson, Maryland, that you can tell a drunk, you just can't tell them much. And you can scare a drunk, it just won't last for long. And that was the case. It just didn't settle in. And I found myself in situations similar to that several more times with the guys and gals that I was hanging out with. I got locked up with the son of the guy that was the head of the building trade union in Baltimore, the Teamsters building trade unions, and got my fingers slapped, and got put out of the house again. Finally, I was on probation again. I got a job with a stationery company in downtown Baltimore. They're no longer there. And I got my own apartment, and I was doing okay for a while. And then people like me seek out people like me, and that apartment became party central. I began drinking at lunch with one of the other bosses in the warehouse, and I kind of BS my way through that company for a couple of years, and then one of the vice presidents got a great idea and said, "You know what? You need to drive a route truck." And I'm like, I hated that thought because I like being one place, regular schedule, routine. And I started driving a route truck for this company. And I started taking that route truck, and guys like me, we try to get it done and get it done quick. And I learned that route, and I like to tell you, I mastered that route only because I want to be back at Kratz's Tavern drinking at a normal time. And I would be in that bar at 2:00 in the afternoon almost every day, till 5. Then I would take the truck back, and then I would come back home on the bus and go back to Kratz's Tavern again. And I did okay at that job for a while. And then people like me, the arrogance of this alcoholic, the company I was working for moved, and they entrusted me to drive their 18-passenger van every day from downtown Baltimore to Elkridge, where they built a new warehouse. And I did okay with that for a while. And then I do what I always do. I drink too much one day, and I can't get up and go to work the next day. And the people riding in that van, they can't get to work the next day. And before you know it, I'm called on the carpet and I'm threatened with my job and all the stuff that goes around that, and I quit. And when I first came into AA, I would hear people say, "Well, I lost my job," and I didn't lose my job. I know exactly where it went. And, it started to go downhill from there for me. I became that person that couldn't hold down a normal job. I became that person that drank every day and got drunk every day. I met my wife in Kratz's Tavern in 1973. She's not, excuse me, she's not alcoholic. She's one of them people that can have a half a beer and be done. I would, get her to go out and we'd have a drink and then she'd be ready to go. And I'd say, well, let's have another. And I would have another and she may or may not have another one. And she'd be ready to go and I would twist her arm to have a third and I would gulp down a third and she'd be ready to go. And I would let her leave because now the pump is primed and I want to drink and shoot shuffleboard and play cards and do all that barroom stuff. I'm not worried about her. And that was in 1973, and we talk in meetings about taking hostages. I still got her tied up in the no, I don't. She's in the other room watching TV. We're still together, and that's only because of the grace of this program and people like you showing me how to grow up and how to live. And we went through that stuff, and we moved in together, and we started trying to do stuff, and she's a hard worker, and I'm a lazy drunk, and I don't want to go to work every day. I'm not capable of going to work every day because I'm sick some days. I'm petrified of the twilight hour because I don't know if it's daytime going into nighttime or nighttime going into daytime. I had one job that I called out 3 times because I didn't know if it was day or night, so I'd called out every time that the light range changed, and the guy asked me, he said, "What's the matter with you?" They knew what was wrong with me. I was drunk all the time, doing crazy stuff, fighting with telephone poles and just all kind, hearing things, seeing just all kinds of crazy stuff. And I wasn't raised that way. I'm not a very good person to live with for a long time. In 1977, 2 of the most important things that ever happened to me happened. And in the beginning of 1977, Gloria told me that she was going to have a child. And she wasn't supposed to have any. She always wanted 7. She wasn't supposed to have any. And she told me she was pregnant. She was going to have a child. And I looked at her just like I'm looking at this screen tonight. And I said to her, "Why would you do that? What is wrong with you?" And it's not because I didn't love the idea, or it's not because I don't love my son, but because deep down inside, I knew that I wasn't capable of being a husband or a father. I knew that. I was a drunk. And the other thing that happened in 1977 was my best friend and good drinking buddy, Ed, had what I thought was a nervous breakdown. And he was at the VA hospital, and I went to see him the next day. And he was talking about it raining in the hallways and babies floating down the aisles, and he was completely out of his mind. And I went back to the bar that afternoon, and I looked at the guy that owned the bar, and I said, "You should see what this stuff has done to him. He's completely nuts." And Eddie drank Pabst, and I drank Pabst, and I switched to Budweiser because I didn't want that to happen to me. And that was the most rational thought I had. And I did that, and it was just insanity in my life from there. And I'll tell you a quick story about Kratz's Tavern. We had a social athletic club. Eddie was the president. I was the vice president. There's another guy that got sober in October 1983. John's his name. He's Sergeant at Arms. So that gives you some inclinations to what we were doing. We had a dart league. We had a shuffleboard league that were all in the bar. We tried a bowling league one year and they threw us out of the bowling alley because some of us tried to throw the ball overhanded to get more accuracy, and they didn't like that too much. And we had a softball team, and our softball team won one game in 5 years. But we were always the first team to pony up for that second half keg of beer. And I thought that was just wonderful. Just another night out to drink every night of the week. Eddie got out of the VA hospital and he came back to Kratz's Tavern to do now what I know is make his amends to the guy that we drank and stole from. And he came in one Saturday morning with these two boys. He was paranoid to go by himself. I mean, booze had a long-lasting effect on him. And he came in and he opened up the windows and the doors and he let the stink out from the night before. And he woke me up. I was on the shuffleboard table, covered in sand. I didn't know if I was at the beach or what the hell was going on. I was all messed up. And he told me that my name was on the chairs in the rooms where he went. I told him what he could do with them chairs, and it's physically impossible. And I meant that with my heart and soul. I meant that I really felt I didn't need that. I firmly believed some of the biggest lies that drunks like me tell ourselves. I firmly believed that I could stop anytime I wanted to. I firmly believed that I wasn't hurting anybody but me. And I firmly believed that I didn't need to talk about that outside to anybody, even if it was a problem. And I continued to drink. And for the next 6.5 years, what I watched was the fear and the terror and the loneliness leave the eyes of him and his family. And it was replaced with joy and laughter. They traveled, they went out. Eddie started working, he got a job, he went to school, he improved his life because he wasn't drinking. And I'm thinking to myself, what has that got to do with anything in the world? And for the next 6.5 years, that fear and that terror went into the eyes of my wife and my son and my family, my parents. I remember we'd go out to see my parents on Sundays. They moved out of the neighborhood. They had this apartment out Baltimore County. We would go out to see them, and I would take my wife and son. We'd go up to their apartment, and I'd say, well, I'm going to run down to the Stag Bar and get 6 beers. And I'd go down to the Stag Bar right behind the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I'd drink 3 or 4, get 6, go back, and I didn't quite make it up to the 3rd floor one day, and I fell on the stairway, and I grabbed one of the pieces of the railing, and I passed out on the stairwell. And the next thing I know, I'm being woke up by a Baltimore County policeman, and he's got his nightstick out, and I got this hunk of wood in my hand, and I thought we were going to duel. And I look up over the railing, and my mother's holding my son, and my father's looking down on me with that look, and we all know what that look is. And he says to me, if that's the best you can do, just stay away. We can't do this anymore. And my answer to him was, that's fine. You'll never see your grandson again. Because that's the guy I am. That's who I am. And nothing changed after that. You know, my mother would sneak around to see my wife and son. My wife and son would get on the bus and go out and see them and wouldn't tell me. I was working these jobs with these guys in the bar. That was the best I could do at this point anymore. And I got this job working with this guy and his wife. He owned this little oil company, and I was hauling gasoline, working on oil burners, drinking all the time. The guy that was teaching me to own the company, he was drinking all the time. I mean, we were a match made in heaven. I tell you, he started teaching me how to work on oil burners. And I'm in the bar one afternoon, and this guy, Jack, who's a merchant marine, he comes over, he lived behind the bar, and I love this guy. This guy was a drunk's drunk. And he would have a shot of beer. He'd put a fifth of 7 Crown in the pocket of his jeans, and he'd walk around the corner and he'd break it. He came back like 3 times this one day. And he'd come back and said, I'm cold. I need heat. And I said, Jack, I'm shooting shuffleboard and drinking beer. I don't have time to help you, but I will. And I went over to his apartment, to his house, and I go in, I go downstairs, and I said, Jack, you didn't hit the reset button on your furnace, did you? And he said, no, I didn't touch nothing. And, I believe in what he's serving, and don't ever do this. I go downstairs, I open up the fire chamber, I crumble up some newspaper, I throw it in the fire chamber, I light it, I shut the door, I hit the on switch, and I thought it blew his house up. It's loud pop, flames all over the place. Somebody called the police department, they called the fire department. I am a nervous wreck. And, I clean up the mess downstairs and shut the furnace off, and the fire department, they're leaving, and I go outside, and the police that are out there, they're laughing, and the neighbors are mad. They are just so mad they could kill me. Basically, all I did was clean this guy's chimney. There was soot all over people's cars, their front porches. They were PO'd. Now I'm a nervous wreck. I go back to Kratz's Tavern just around the corner. And I go back into the bar, and I'm not laughing. I'm not smiling. I am just petrified. Our book talks about that. We can't remember the pain and humiliation of a week or a month ago. And I'm struggling with it for 10 or 15 minutes. And I get that cold beer and I get that first sip, and it's the funniest thing that ever happened in my life. That's that Jekyll and Hyde in my drunkenness. And I did things like that for I hauled gasoline drunk through the Harbor Tunnel. There's warnings up. I shudder when we're driving on the road and I go past a tanker, because I'm hoping that guy ain't like me. And I didn't care. And what I learned from you folks is that the reason why I didn't care about you is because I didn't know how to care about me. And I continued drinking like that until September 23rd, 24th of 1983. My wife planned a birthday party for my son. It was his 6th birthday. She said, please don't mess it up. To this moment, I don't know if she meant don't show up, don't mess it up, don't come, don't what. I don't know what she meant. One of those days where I work, I go to the bar with a guy I used to work with. We wind up going over to this bar over in Hamden to see his twin brother. I'm drunk. I think I'm fine. He's drunk. He thinks he's fine. He wants to drive my car. I got it. No problem. I go up 36th Street. There's a 7-Eleven there now. It used to be a BP gas station. I go to make a U-turn in this gas station, and I hit this woman's car. I get out of my car. She gets out of her car. I'm hollering at her. She's petrified. She's running down 36th Street with her arms flapping in the air. She looked like the robot from Lost in Space, hollering warning. Next thing I know, there's 2 police cars and a paddy wagon. I'm trying to give this guy the Red Fox routine. Kevin described my height. I'm short. I'm built for running, not for fighting. 2 cops pick me up, chuck me in the back of this paddy wagon, and away we go. We go to the local district, then we go to Baltimore City Jail. The next thing I know, I come to, laying in a puddle of I don't know what. God knows who left it there. And I'm looking around and I'm like, man, I don't belong here. And I asked God to help me. And from that moment to this, I haven't had a drink or a drug or anything else. I never say I haven't found it necessary to drink, because if Gloria were to come in right now, she would tell you that none of his drinking was necessary. He's just a drunken bum. And that's what I was for a long time. You know, I met her, she was 18, I was 19. And we were voted most likely not to succeed. And I tried to prove them all right for a long time. I got out of jail. I went to see a public defender, and he told me I should do something about the way I drank, that it would look good in front of the judge. And that was my motivation to come to you people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know anything about not drinking. I didn't know anything about coming to AA. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff, but it sounded like a good shortcut. So I called my friend Ed. He wasn't home. I left him a message like I was somebody important. Well, I have him call me when he gets in. And he called me a couple of days later, and I started to tell him my tale of woe. And I don't talk the way Eddie talked anywhere. He was 17 years in the Marine Corps. So I don't talk the way he talked, especially in an AA meeting. And I started to tell him my tale of woe, and he said, Bum, I'll take you to a meeting if you want to go. And Eddie had picked me up 2 nights later and took me down to my first AA meeting in Lithical, Maryland by the airport. The most important thing that's ever happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous happened to me that night. Parked the car, we walked up to this church door. This guy was standing outside the door, and he's put his hand out and he said, welcome. I hadn't been made to feel like I was welcome anywhere in a long, long time. So if you're new or just coming back, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's where you're at. I went into that room, and Eddie walked around that room and shook everybody's hand and talked with everybody. And I stood there like a lump. I thought he was running for office. I had no idea what he was doing. We came back, we got a little bit of coffee, and we sat down, and the guy opened up the meeting like Kevin did this evening by saying something to the effect of that the things you hear talked about in this room tonight, if they haven't happened to you yet, keep drinking and they can. So if you haven't had lunch at your local jail, keep drinking, you probably can. Then this woman stood up and she started talking about the way she drank. And this woman talked about hiding drinks all over the house and sneaking booze and hiding bottles and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm a loudmouth with a barroom drunk. I couldn't identify with that. She stopped talking about the way she drank, and she started talking about the way she felt when she came to in the morning, and she got my attention. Because I always thought that I woke up every day. What I can share with you tonight is if you're on a shuffleboard table covered in sand, in the front yard or on the front porch, on the living room floor, or in a bathtub filled or not filled with water, you're probably coming to, you're probably not waking up. And I listened. And if she'd have said, go stand in the back of the room on your head, that's how you get sober, I'd have been the first one back there. But I'm here to tell you that that's not enough for a guy like me. Just telling me just doesn't serve it up for a guy like me, especially when I was new. And I'd like to sit here and tell you tonight that I've gotten gold stars in AA ever since that night. And that would be a lie. Because all I did for the next 2.5 years was get involved in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to a lot of AA meetings. Eddie was my sponsor. He was my friend. So I didn't really feel a commitment that I had to do a whole lot of this stuff that you folks were talking about. We went to meetings all over town. I loved it. I miss Ed every day. Got his picture on the bedroom wall mirror in the bedroom that I'm in. Ed he just took me all over the place. We would leave out of the house on a Saturday morning to go to a meeting in Harford County and wind up in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And that was every weekend we would do stuff like that. He took me to conferences. He took me all over the place. And, all I did was hold on for dear life because that's all I was capable of doing. I went to court in December of 1983. And the first thing the judge said was, I'm going to sentence you to 5 years. And I'm like, oh my God, you're kidding me. This was about 4 days before Christmas. And he looked up and he looked down at me and he said, I'm going to give you a break because I believe these two guys that were with you wouldn't lie for you. And he said, you need to continue to do what you'd been doing for the last 90 days. Or I'm going to give you those 5 years. And I'm going to give you a whole lot more. And no court costs and no fines. And that was the first year we had a Christmas that I didn't break the tree. I didn't break anything that year. In fact, Eddie and I went to a meeting on Christmas Eve at the old Agape group at the Mother House in Towson. And we cleaned up after the meeting and Ed went home and I sat there till about 3 o'clock in the morning with a husband and wife. The wife was the drunk of the family. The husband was the Al-Anon. And they listened to me cry and babble till about 3 o'clock in the morning because I was scared to go home. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand it. I lived like that for the next 2.5 years and going on 2.5, 3 years sober. I'm restless, irritable, discontent. My mind's racing. I can't concentrate on stuff. I work in a decent job. Life is getting somewhat better, but things around me are getting somewhat better. But there's no recovery. And one Saturday, beautiful Saturday like today, I got up. I was late. I was supposed to meet Eddie at a meeting, and I blamed it on Gloria because it was her fault. It was always her fault. And I started hollering at her. She looked at me and she said, the only thing that's changed with you in the last 2.5 years is your breath. And she walked away. And I was going to choke the life out of her because she told the truth, but I don't want to hear the truth. What she did that afternoon was save my life. I went out of that house in a fit of rage. I went up York Road to catch up with my sponsor, Eddie, and I caught up with him. And I said, Ed, you should hear what she said to me now. And he said, look, bum, if you want to drink, go drink. Nobody cares. That's not how he said it. It took a lot longer than that. When he got done this tirade, he said, you would better get down on your hands and knees and ask God to help you or you're going to get drunk. I went home that afternoon. I could read the book, the big book. I'd find a page, I'd read it, shut the book, and never find it again. But I've always read As Bill Sees It, because As Bill Sees It was written for idiots like me who can only retain little bits and pieces of this AA recovery program. And I got down on my knees and I found the 3rd step prayer in that book, and I said that prayer and I cried and I surrendered. And from that afternoon up until the time Eddie died, he guided me through these 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he taught me about the 12 traditions that hold Alcoholics Anonymous together. And he taught me about the 12 concepts of service in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I balked at every one of these steps from start to finish. And Eddie would tell me stories about me and my drinking. We started to get into the 1st step, and I said, my life has always been unmanageable for a long time. But powerless? Nah, no way, not me. And he said, Bum, remember on Monday nights we shoot shuffleboard and you'd come down to the bar every now and again and you'd declare to the whole world, you're not drinking tonight. You're going to go home and read your son a story and be a good dad and put him to bed. And I'd say, yeah, I remember that. And he'd say, what happened? It would last about an hour and then somebody would buy me a beer and I'd be off to the races again. He said, that's powerlessness. You have no mental defense against the first drink. And when I started looking at my drinking, I drank when I didn't want to drink. I got drunk when I didn't want to get drunk. I heard Clancy one time say he was overserved. I like that. I don't use it, but I like that. You know, I didn't want to stop. And when I thought about having that first drink, that was all she wrote. We got to the second step. I looked at it, how can somebody like me be restored to sanity? She says, we're talking about your drinking. And then you work your way up from there. And I started to ask God to keep me sober. When we got to the third step, how do you turn your will and life over to something that you don't believe in and you can't see and you can't touch? He said, just fake it for a while. Just pray. And I started to listen to people in Alcoholics Anonymous share about their God, their loving and caring God. And I have a relationship with a higher power today for me that's personal, that I believe is the rock of my life, that I start my day with and I end my day with, and I call on during the course of the day. And that transformation's only taken place because I come to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and listen to people like you share with me how you've done that, how you've gotten over those hurdles. Eddie was the kind of guy we'd go to a step meeting and somebody would talk about the golden book, the red book, the green book, the black book. And I'd say, yeah, that's what I need. That'll help me get over the hump of writing this fourth step. Well, one night I sat down, we had this big glass top table in our dining room. I got all this crap on the dining room table and I'm like, I'm going nuts. And I called Ed and I said, Ed, I quit. I'm not doing it no more. He says, what are you talking about? So I'm trying to write my fourth step and I got all this and that. And he says, look, take your big book, your pad and your pencil and put it on one side of the table. He said, go in the kitchen and get your trash can out of the kitchen. Put it at the other end of the table. Take your right hand, sweep all that other crap in the trash can, open up the big book, follow the instructions, and he hung up. He was at the top of the resentment list that night. And I sat there and I muddled through that fourth step. And it wasn't a documentary and it wasn't perfect. But it cleared away some of that wreckage. Out of desperation, a couple of weeks later, we were up at the old Agape group cleaning up and we were in the non-smoking room cleaning up and I shut the door and I sat down. I said, we got to do this. I couldn't stand it no longer. I had to get this off. I had to be done with this. We got done. We shared with each other about our lives. And what he told me that day before we started is what he told me when I first came in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, Bob, we knew all about you as soon as you walked through the door. There's nothing unique about you. And it helped ease my mind to get through this. I went home that afternoon and I read through the 6th and the 7th step in the big book. And I started trying to make some amends and making that list. And Eddie said, before you do anything, we talk about it. Because one time when I was drinking, I shared something with somebody that I shouldn't have. And I thought it was being the right thing to do. And I was clearing my conscience and didn't care about nobody else. And our literature describes that as leading with the chin. And Eddie and I talked about everything that I did from that point on. So I started going through the 8-step list and making the amends on the 9th step. We got to the 10th step, and that's part of where I'm at today. I read the 10th step every day. And in the book, it says, by now we've been restored to sanity. And I don't know about that. It says we have to continue to watch out for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And those feelings and those defects can come on at any time. And I have to be ready for them. I had an old trash man in Baltimore City named John. He used to tell me, boy, you're wasting a lot of good sobering up time. He says, stop trying to memorize this stuff and start utilizing it. And I looked at him like he was nuts. I thought you had to memorize this stuff. Well, I stopped trying to memorize it and I started trying to apply it to my life. And I stayed involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got involved. My sponsor, Eddie, took me to institutions. And the first institution he took me to was Clifton T. Perkins. It's the home for the criminally insane. And I'm like, why would you take me there? What is wrong with you? And we went there one Wednesday night, and you went through the Sally Port, and the door it banged shut. And I'm like, oh my God. We go down in this dark, dank basement in this library. And he sets me down at this table next to a rocker. And I don't mean any disrespect, but this woman just rocked for the entire hour. Back and forth, back and scared the living daylights out of me. I'd never been exposed to anything like that. We get done the meeting, we get outside, we get in the parking lot, and I said, what is wrong with you? Why would you bring me to a place like this? And he looked at me and he said, bum, pick up a drink, and you'll be lucky if you wind up in a place like that. And I'm like, my God, he's serious. And he was very serious. He taught me about the impact of this disease. One of the greatest gifts Eddie ever gave me is that he made me responsible for my own sobriety. Told me I can't do this for you. He showed me and took me where he went and what he did. And he shared with me how to do things sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I stayed involved. He took me to that first institution committee meeting, and they wanted to throw groups out of AA for not making their commitment that month. And I'm like, I'm never coming back to that. That is crazy. Absolutely nuts. I still have the privilege and honor of sponsoring a meeting on that institution committee on Zoom in Baltimore every Tuesday night. I had the privilege and honor of serving as the chairperson and the literature person for that committee. I've had the privilege and honor of serving as the intergroup chairperson. I've had so many things happen to me in Alcoholics Anonymous that I said, what does that got to do with not drinking one day at a time? That now what I know is that it has everything about not drinking one day at a time. Old John taught me some new habits. Thank God for the old timers in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you what, they're mean, they're nasty, but they love us. They really do. These guys cared more about me and they cared about my feelings for a long, long time. So old John gave me some things to do, and I still do them today. I wake up in the morning, I don't come to anymore. I get down on my knees and I thank God for allowing me to wake up. I ask God to protect me from a drink, a drug, and a cigarette. I say some prayers that are generally for the well-being of others and my family and people that are ill. I get up, I go into the back bedroom where I'm at now, and I sit down and I read a page or two out of As Bill Sees It. I read our daily reflection book. I read the Hazelden 24-hour day book. I've read it every day since I was sober. I love that book. It's not conference approved, but neither is the Bible or Road Atlas. So, that's what I do. And then I read out of the big book, the entire 3rd, the 6th, the 7th, 10th, and 11th steps every day. And I do that because the 3rd step talks about the self-resistant, self-centered person that I used to be and that I can be at any given time. The 6th and the 7th steps remind me that I still have character defects, but because of this program, I can die with them and not from them today. The 10th step tells me that I have a daily reprieve that's contingent upon the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And that means I have to get up and do something every day. I have to say my prayers. I have to come to meetings. I have to have an AA contact every day. And the 11th step tells me exactly what to do from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. It's right there in black and white. And Eddie told me, even you can figure that out. You read the black part, leave the white part alone. You're not smart enough. Eddie used to tell me all kinds of crazy stuff that I didn't understand. I got into a debate with him one day about the big book early on. And he opened up the 3rd edition of the big book. and the very first page is blank. And he looked at me, he said, "That's what you know." And then he opened up the next page and it says Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, "That's what we know." So if you let our thinking keep you here because your thinking got you here, you got a shot. So I'm about out of steam, Kevin. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to come and speak at your group tonight. I want to thank you folks for coming and tolerate me for the last hour. I want to wish you all well, and I want to say a prayer that I hope you all find the love and the happiness that I've found in Alcoholics Anonymous in the last 40 plus years. I wish you all to find that. Thank you very much.